Interesting. All right. We are officially at noon, and I may follow up with further questions to Todd and Everett on my personal mission. So welcome to those of you who have joined us. This is a webinar that will go through the basics and maybe the future state of digital therapeutics and DCT and how they're related or how they can be related. The meeting is being recorded and the recording will be made available after the session. My name is Jane Myles. I'm the VP of Clinical Trial Innovation at Curebase, which is a DCT technology and services organization. But my background is in classical drug development, having been trained as a pharmacologist. So I'm here to learn from some experts, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So let's start with Amir.
Surprise me. Yes, Amir Lahav. I'm very excited to be here with you guys today. I think it's going to be really fun, great discussion. I am on the board of Curebase. I'm a freelance consultant in the field of digital health innovation. Ex-Harvard, ex-Pfizer, and yeah, that's it.
All right, Mr. Todd, how about hearing from you?
Sure. Todd Maddox. I'm the VP of Research and Development at Applied VR. I've been with the company for a couple of years, and I had a former pretty long career as a basic scientist and a university professor.
That sounds pretty interesting. I will be following up. And Everett.
Yeah, thanks. Everett Crosland, run the commercial organization at Cognito Therapeutics. We are a breakthrough designated platform focused on neurodegenerative diseases, with our first product focused on Alzheimer's, and ideally, likely quickly thereafter, mild cognitive impairment and Parkinson's and other neurodegenerative diseases as well. Prior to Cognito, I had the great pleasure of working with Todd at Applied VR, where I was the Chief Commercial Officer. And prior to that, I was at Therapeutics and had a career in the pharmaceutical industry as well. Glad to be here. Really looking forward to this discussion with everyone. So thanks.
Well, thanks. So our first intention is to level set. So if you're newer to digital therapeutics, we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, what it doesn't mean, and how it's a little bit different or similar from drug development. I got really excited, Everett, when we were talking about MCI and Alzheimer's, having done a lot of drug development in that space. So I'm going to advance the slide to show some of the information from the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, DTA, about digital therapeutics and products that make claims about being digital therapeutics and how they need to meet certain criteria. So we won't go through each of these. I promise not to read it to you, but I would like to hear from our experts about what your definition of digital therapeutics is. And it's equally interesting to me to hear what it's not. So who wants to start?
Go for it, Amir.
Okay, I'll go. It's easy to say what it's not. I think that in the core definition of digital therapeutics is the word therapeutics, which means there is the intention to treat. It's a therapeutic intervention that is not based on a pharmacological mechanism. There is no drug, there's no infusion. It's most likely or usually involve either a mobile app or a mobile app with a device, like a VR, for example. And it's, if the research is done correctly and the evidence is collected in the right way, then there is a statistically significant and valid way to show that there is a therapeutic effect of that intervention. And you compare like you compare any other two groups in a drug trial, sometimes even a blinded trial or a sham group, control group, and you can prove that this therapeutic product can lead to better health results. We see it along, many therapeutic areas, and we see a lot of mobile applications now to improve sleep disorders, mental health, nutrition, GI issues, attention deficits. It's all over. But if it's a mobile app that is just focused on entertainment, education, resources, maybe self-growth and development, spiritual journey, or things like that, this is not really falling under the category of digital therapeutics.
So that
there's
makes
a fine
me ask
line.
the question right away. I don't know about you, I get a ton of ad content about the Calm app. So is that a digital therapeutic or not so much?
So I think Amir summarized it quite eloquently. So the Calm app, I think it fits into digital therapeutics when they're in an aspirational way, because I don't think Calm has anything that's FDA cleared, approved, or authorized. And so if Calm moves forward with products where they make medical claims, and those medical claims track back to outcomes that are mediated by the Calm software, then I think you're in a realm where they're very much squarely in the digital therapeutics realm. Today, I think Calm's obvious primary offering would be a digital wellness product, and you can make wellness claims that are backed by clinical validation, which I think Calm does quite a bit of, and that clinical validation is actually quite robust when it comes to Calm and a few other non-FDA regulated products, and those products are still providing, or are in fact providing, I think, really positive effects for their users, but it fits in a different kind of category, right? They're users, not necessarily patients. They're not medical claims, they're wellness claims or statements. And I think the Digital Therapeutics Alliance it continues to expand its scope to be comprehensive. But as you can see here in this definition, and I think as with any novel category, that definition probably has a fair amount of gray around it. The intent is largely for these products to be substantiated by clinical validation, submitted through a regulatory body, as you can see in one of those bullets, for review of some level, and then making claims that are regulated claims, not necessarily unregulated wellness claims. That's probably the only thing I would add to what Amir said. So.
And Todd, I'm jumping in to ask a question. Like in your case, there is a device, not just a mobile app that through the interactions with the app, there is some sort of a therapeutic effect. How would you define a company that is a medical device company as opposed to your company, Applied VR, that is within the realm of digital therapeutics?
Yeah, I mean, the Applied VR is a medical device company. Now, I actually love the distinction, and I think it's really important about being regulated, right? I mean, as a basic scientist teaching basically undergrad statistics and experimental design forever, people make so many claims with either no data, correlational data. Like correlation doesn't prove causation. People love causation, and yet they don't have the data behind it. So I love Everett's point about you've got to have those rigorous studies. You have to have gone through that regulatory process to really make those additional claims. I mean, this may or may not answer your question, Amir, but I think one thing that I know I run into a lot at Applied VR, and we have a 8-week chronic pain management program that actually is FDA approved. I get a lot of people say, well, I can get that in a mobile app. And simply put, you can't get that in a mobile app. There are a lot of mobile apps that offer pain solutions, and that's great. The biggest difference, I guess, with respect to virtual reality as a medical device, let's say, versus your traditional mobile app, is this immersive nature of the device. And I can't emphasize that enough. As somebody who's been studying the way the brain learns, neuroplasticity, all these things around behavior change and brain changes, the way that a device like virtual reality, and I want to actually be really clear because this is top of mind and is constantly top of mind to me. A virtual reality device is just a big clunky paperweight. That's all it is. The content inside that device is what's key. So a lot of people talk about, oh, we have a VR for pain. And I'm like, okay, what exactly is the content within your device? Because that's actually critical. So the device has the potential to just supercharge the brain. And that sounds kind of corny, but it's really true. When you put that device on, you're immersed in a new environment. You can train behaviors. The way you train behavior is spaced out over time. You get that with these kinds of medical devices. Sure, you can have periodic space training with a mobile device, but it's not immersive, right? And that's really the key, that immersion sort of engages these sensory and representation centers in the brain that literally make you think that you're there, right? The classic walk the plank, VR experience, which is kind of fun, but it's like you are literally, people call it tricking the brain. You're not tricking the brain. The brain actually thinks you're there because, frankly, all the information coming into the brain is there. So I think that's really the power of a medical device like that, is the ability to sort of spread the wealth of this knowledge and learning across the brain, which you don't necessarily get with some mobile apps. That's not to say that there aren't good, high quality mobile apps out there. It's just, I think, sort of where you can go with behavior change and such. I think you go to a new level with these kinds of medical devices.
Yeah, if I can just add one piece there, I think there are quite a few digital therapeutics out there that rely on hardware for their delivery, right? And VR, to me, it's is a mechanism of delivery. And the analogy that I think about, and Cognito Therapeutics has hardware as well, so I'm kind of speaking my own book here too. But the analogy I think about in the drug world is, you can put API in a pill, you can infuse it, or you can dose it intranasally right into the brain. If you're talking about something that's targeting a CNS target. And all of those delivery mechanisms are going to have vastly, vastly different effects, right? And so content, if you think about software as the API, if we deliver that software via an app, or we deliver that software via virtual reality, those are going to, in a very similar fashion, those are going to have very different effects on clinical outcomes and neurophysiologic effects as well. And so that's often how I think about it, is a mechanism of delivery, but you're looking at really what Todd's saying is when he talks about the content, that's your API, and that API has to, and I mean that by active pharmaceutical ingredient, not the software API. But the that in and of itself is really what's mediating the outcomes, and the other pieces are delivery. But absolutely they have a fundamental effect on potency. You could even look at it like pharmacokinetics and things like that, right? So.
I'd like to go into that in a minute, actually. How did digital therapeutics get started? Like, who came up with this big idea?
Yeah, I mean the genesis, and Amir can talk about this. He's been at it in this space for longer than I think others on this call, myself included. Genesis goes back to mid 2000s, when you started to have kind of digitized chronic disease management tools that ultimately evolved into behavioral health nudges and interventions and things like that. Some of the earlier companies, and I think there's probably even a generation or two before this, but some of the earlier companies that we would point to and say that concept is really still alive in the industry today, are companies like Amada and WellDoc, that really started the kind of behavioral health management side of things. And then you see, the next generation coming on with like a prescription digital therapeutic model. Those would be like Achille and Pear Therapeutics, and Cognito with their diagnostic and the potential therapeutic in autism. That's kind of how I've categorized things. But anytime you look back over it's a couple of decades, and I'm sure I'm glossing over some pioneers either between those two generations or prior to that the first generation as well. Amir, who am I missing?
No, not missing. I mean, it's really hard to know when exactly it started.
Yeah.
The question, is it important to know?
Right.
Which is another question. I mean, I could argue that when I was 14 years old and I was sick, and my grandma sent a fax to my parents with her secret recipe for tea with honey and lemon that only she can do the best. And that was maybe the beginning of prescription digital therapeutics. Actually, the same grandma, I can tell you that when I, one time, when she got older, got into the Alzheimer phase, I was away on a trip. I mean, it's completely unrelated, but I just remember, and I needed some info. I needed a document that was at her house. And I tried to explain how to fax it over to me. And I still remember that call because it's so powerful. So I'm on the phone, on the other phone with her, and she's saying, yeah, I'm sending it. Oh, no, it's coming back. It's coming back. That's basically what she saw, the page coming back through the fax, and she thought that it wasn't sent. So that's sometimes what can happen to good people when Alzheimer kicks in. But I want to say something about VR. I mean, I agree with you that like VR is the infusion pump. It's the capsule, right? Depends what we fill it with. But I don't want people to walk away from this webinar thinking that every medical device is necessarily digital therapeutics. I don't want people to walk away from this webinar thinking that every medical device company that manufacture VR equipment is digital therapeutics, right? It really depends what you do with it. And with regard to the regulatory process, there is some gray area. We would love to say, yeah, everything must be regulated, but I think this is the difference between prescription digital therapeutics and non-prescription digital therapeutics. I can develop tomorrow morning an app, put it on the App Store. I'll have 5 billion users who may report anecdotally one way or another that my app actually makes them feel better. would that be considered digital therapeutics? Could be, if my intention was to treat and to make them feel better, even though it's not regulated, it may fall under the category, because at this point in time, FDA does not enforce a specific regulatory requirement for those digital therapeutics assets, whether it's an app or not. But the last thing that I don't want people to walk away from this webinar with the thought that an equipment like VR is necessarily better than mobile applications. I think that I agree with you, Todd, completely about the effect that VR can do on the human brain. But I think it's a fit for purpose. It really depends what you want to treat and what are you trying to change. If you're going to a psychiatrist or a therapist, there is no equipment. It's just a human being talking to you, and that could be very therapeutic, could really be helpful. There are a wide variety of ways to change behavior and impact or rewire the way we think. I think it's really depends on the thing. What are we trying to treat? There are things that would be very difficult to treat and to reach continuity over a long period of time just simply by interacting with a mobile app. You might need a little bit of a deeper and more invasive procedure in order to really rewire in some of this behavior. But these are just my thoughts. I mean, you guys definitely can disagree. I would love to.
I think what would be interesting for me now is to kind of take what you just said, Amir, and apply the context layer of what you three are doing with use case examples. So how do you actually set up some sort of a study to test and then hopefully prove your claim? And how do you account for variability between patients? I often, in fact, this came up recently, like how do you separate out the engagement element that might lead to a placebo effect versus the therapeutic benefit from the digital intervention? I don't know how to do that, but I'm sure that you've tackled those questions in studies. So who wants to chime in with an example here?
Well, I'm happy to. So, I mean, first thing, Amir, I agree with you 100%. And I appreciate the elaboration. I don't want anybody to think that I'm arguing that virtual reality is the answer to every problem. It's not. You have to have a framework. And in fact, several years back, I laid out a very simple framework. Basically, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What are the brain regions that I need to activate in the interest of solving that problem? And what technology best engages those brain regions? There are a lot of problems where the prefrontal cortex and your cognitive brain regions need to be engaged, and that's it. And that's not to demean the prefrontal cortex, because it's amazing. You do not need VR for that. That's overkill. There are other problems where you want to provide real-time feedback. Maybe augmented reality is the way to go there. So it depends on the problem that you're trying to solve. With respect to, evaluating your the tool that you've developed, I mean, I don't know, hundreds and hundreds of years of basic experimental design. That's what you apply. Now, and I don't mean to be flippant, but like, correlation doesn't prove causation, but look around you. There are a lot of people with correlations trying to argue causation. So you have to run a study where you have a therapeutic group, you have a control group that you treat identically in every respect, except for that critical manipulation. That is, simply put, impossible to do, right? So there's noise in your data, which is why a good scientist runs a study, pats themselves on the back, writes the paper, argues for how great the study is, and is the most skeptical of the results, and wants to run another study and another study and another study, because a good scientist knows that I've got a sample of 200 people. I'll take our recent pivotal trial, 200 people as a representation, or as allegedly a representative sample of 100 million people in America. Like, so, you have to be skeptical of your result, but you've got to run a clean study. You've got to have a control group. You've got to treat the groups identically as much as you can. Look for any potential confounds or flaws that might explain your findings, other than what you believe is the critical factor, which is the variable that you're manipulating.
Todd, as you said, the problem is that there is no, one study cannot answer all the questions. So it's sometimes hard to tease apart, all those sub-questions that we really want to answer. But to simplify the answer, Jan, it's basically there is a digital therapeutics solution like the one that Akili is doing in the form of a video game that has been shown to yield positive results and improvement in the treatment of ADHD. Is it curing ADHD? No, it's not a cure, but it can definitely help kids with ADHD. When you want to challenge a digital therapeutic solution, you always have to ask yourself, wait. So are you telling me that every time I play any video game, I could actually benefit from that? Like, why do I have to pay money and download that specific video game? Maybe I can play something that is very similar, and my child, I would actually say, my child has ADHD, believe it or not. It's actually true. My son does have ADHD. He plays video games all day long, and it doesn't help him. Why do you think your video game will help him? And Eddie and I are very close friends. I'm not trying to put him on the grill here, but it's just trying to put the framework, the scientific framework here, how you dress up a study or undress a study to ask those teasing questions. See, there's a behavioral therapy, Sleepio by Big Health, trying to help you fall asleep and problems with insomnia. And the app is talking to you in different ways. There's but maybe just a matter of attention. Maybe just people get the attention from the app and somebody is saying some positive things to them. It doesn't have to be that particular app. Maybe I will engage with something else and that will make me less stressed. I will be less anxious. I will sleep much better. So this is where it comes to doing all of those studies that Todd was talking about. You just need to be very, not to accept things as they are and say, wait. What does it mean?
Yeah, the only thing I would add there, I think, is that what we're talking about is ensuring that there's reproducibility, recognizing that we are operating in a noisier data set a lot of times, and so ensuring reproducibility, but also, and Eddie's done this quite well at Akili. I think what helps is when available, when you're able to point to neuronal changes in the brain that are observable and validated. I think, there's obviously we can image the brain and make assumptions, but about what we see. But when there's already a validated disposition in that imagery, and we're able to see that via the stimulation or the administration of our therapeutic, then that helps substantiate the story as well. You can't rely on that by itself, and it only fills in one small part of the story. But I think more and more digital therapeutics are substantiating their evidence with brain imagery, because there's increasingly a body of evidence that demonstrates that if you're engaging with VR, or if you're engaging with our like a Cognito or gamma frequency modulation, those are pretty well substantiated neuronal changes that we're looking for. And if we're able to achieve those, then we can say, well, in addition to the well-controlled study, here's what we're seeing in the brain as well. And that's happening more and more. Eddie did it. Med Rhythms is doing it. We're doing it at Cognito. I know others are doing it as well. And I think it just helps further bring additional rigor to our story and body of evidence.
Totally agree. Keely did an amazing job. Worked very, very hard, much harder than a lot of other companies, to get to that point.
Yeah.
That they have that evidence. We are all coming from neuroscience, sort of. I mean, Todd at least is definitely. There's one thing that I like, the way I think about it. In a traditional drug trial, usually there is a primary endpoint. The primary endpoint in traditional drug trials are 99% of the time are endpoints that are not necessarily directly related to quality of life and functions and activity of daily living or anything like that. Usually the primary endpoint in drug trials have to do with the mechanism of action. So in a cancer study, you will look for the size of the tumor, right? Tumor shrinking, okay. In a study, maybe in a neuromuscular disease where you were doing gene therapy, you may be looking at a muscle biopsy as a primary endpoint to see that you're actually made the change. Sometimes gene expression could be a primary endpoint, or lab results, right? Lab results of your just A1C if it's a diabetes. The criticism that FDA gives, and the criticism that comes from patient advocacy groups many times on clinical trials like that, said, we don't care about the primary endpoint. I just had a call last week about a disease where the primary endpoint was forced vital capacity, just that.
Yeah, FEV.
Right? And patients don't care about it because they say, yeah, the study shows that medication improves 10%, but it doesn't change my life. I still feel like, I still don't feel well. I still don't have the energy. I still cannot do my thing. So in digital therapeutics, I think the roles are reversed. The primary endpoint is actually the thing that is most important to patients. It's the things that you can measure, like behavior, like well-being, like energy, like improved attention. And then on top of that, we have sometimes a secondary endpoint like brain imaging that would help us prove the neural correlates underlying this therapy. So we have an additional evidence that this is not just a fluke. It's not just by chance. We actually have some evidence to understand, to explain how it happened. And it's not just, oh, I don't know, I was just playing with the app and all of a sudden I feel better, right? So the roles are reversed. And that's what I like about digital therapeutics, that the primary endpoint is the thing that the most important to the patient.
I think that's interesting because I like your classification. As a pharmacologist, I also think those tumor measurements and lab values, they're what I call hard objective measures. Behavior, that's a hard thing to measure and really hard to tease out therapeutic benefit. So how do you make the two groups similar? You talked about shams. I would think it would be really interesting to hear how exactly do you set that up in a DTX setting like a VR delivered therapeutic?
Well, your sham it has to be the same device.
Mhm.
So you have to send the same novel, innovative device that they've never seen before. The difference is what is the key? So, I mean, in our case, the critical the critical factors in the chronic pain solution that we're building is that it's immersive. So it's 3D immersive and follows a particular therapeutic journey. So the sham is not immersive. Now it's delivered within the same device, but it's effectively a big screen TV inside of a device. It needs to at least be presented as a therapeutic. So there's a journey to it. At least that's what's described to the participants. But again, the critical difference between your therapeutic and that sham control has to be only in the aspects that you believe set the therapeutic apart. So like, if we, and actually this was before my time, but there was a study run where the control was an audio only. I mean, and that's interesting, right? And it tests whether it's the audio versus audio plus visual. But there's a lot of big differences there. So it makes it harder to really pinpoint what the potential causal mechanism is. So having the active control, and Everett, you probably were in on all these conversations before I started, but where the FDA and a pre-sub pushed back and said, we really like you to have an active control. So build your control into the same headset.
And I think this is a great example about the audio and the visual. The company MedRhythm, for example, which I have a lot of appreciation to, because my early neuroscience days were focused on studying music in the brain and the effect of music in the brain. But there is a reason that Owen didn't choose to call his company MedMusic, because it is about the rhythm. It's not necessarily about the music. The music could potentially motivate you to do different things and could influence maybe how much you want to engage in the therapy. But neurologically, what we are tuned to synchronize our movement with is the rhythmic part of the music. It's not the chord progression. And Jen, you're a musician. It's not the lyrics. These are just decoration. The core mechanism of MedRhythm is the rhythmic part, which would be an interesting experiment that I'm pretty sure they have done, to tease out, to undress the whole music just to the rhythm, to the metronome, and see if that as of itself can work without the entire accompaniment.
It works every day when I'm running, but I can't say I have a claim because I have only done a study that was not unblinded. We did have a question from the audience, actually, from Greg Jackson, who thinks you're all brilliant and is grateful you're here. So he was curious if you could share amongst the group your top 2 or 3 recommendations for DTX in anxiety and depression and or pain reduction. And then we're going to flip a little bit over to DCTs for a minute. But how about that round robin? What would you recommend to Greg about anxiety and depression or pain reduction and studying DTX interventions in those cases?
God, that's an interesting question for this audience. I think, when I think about anxiety and depression, especially with depression, there are an incredible number of offerings out there. And you probably want to think about what type of depression that you're talking about, as opposed to just kind of generalized depression, same with anxiety. I mean, you look at Free Spira, for example. Free Spira has an indication or a label that allows them to make medical claims in panic as well as PTSD. So types of anxiety, and I think Free Spira has great durability in their data, in that you can use it for, I think it might be 8 weeks. I'm probably speaking out of turn here, but short period of time, which typically helps drive pretty good engagement. The shorter the time necessary to be on the product, the better a lot of times. And yet they have durability out to months and months, if not a year, for reduction of their symptoms and panic and PTSD. But with depression, I mean, God, the list is so long, and it's hard to even kind of speak to that without kind of understanding what type of depression you're talking about. There are companies like Health Rhythms that for serious mental illness for patients living with serious mental illness, they can detect a decomposition, a mental health decomposition, up to 2 weeks in advance of standard of care. Somebody asked Free Spira. It's FREESPIRA, Yvonne. And so somebody like Health Rhythms is great with certain types of SMIs, but without going on too long, it's kind of my thinking around anxiety and depression is you got to be pretty specific, just like with drugs, with what you're looking to treat. Without knowing more, it's hard to really make a recommendation there. And then with pain, I mean, we got Applied VR here on the call, but again, kind of like with pain, there's specific types of pain that may or may not be appropriate for certain digital therapeutics.
Oh, go ahead, Tom.
I mean, I would throw out some really interesting solutions like Hinge Health, Sword Health, Train Pain, obviously what we're doing.
Any competitors to Applied VR?
Well, we are the only FDA approved chronic lower back pain solution. So,
well, the question was, well, I see, I'm looking at the text here. Greg, thank you for sharing about the chicken soup. It's very interesting. But in terms of companies in that area, digital therapeutics companies that I can recommend in depression and pain and anxiety, I don't normally provide recommendation, but since some companies knew I'm going to be on the webinar and they wire money directly to my bank account,
it's an affiliate fee, right, Amir?
Yeah, no. But I do what I can share through the chat. I can share one of my recent LinkedIn posts that actually just about that, and it has a nice summary of some of the lead companies in this area. And I actually, even in the post, as you can see, I asked, did I forget anyone? And there were some companies that commented and said, oh yeah, you did. You should include us too. And so I think it's a very comprehensive post eventually. I just share it through the chat. Eventually, it's really what works for you. And I don't think at this point there is like any research that compared two digital therapeutics assets. We're still trying just to prove one against control. We're not running it against each other. Although that's maybe an opportunity to say that there are many, not many, but there are emerging collaborations between digital therapeutics companies and pharma companies. Mm-hmm. And one would wonder why this collaboration, what's the nature of this collaboration? Isn't there a competition here, right? If I'm a pharma company and I have a drug for depression, why would I want to collaborate with a digital therapeutics company who is actually claiming that they can help depression without my drug? And insurance companies will probably prefer to cover the cost of the app because it's much cheaper than paying for the drug. So the nature of this collaboration is because there are some smart people in pharma, not a lot, but there are some smart people in pharma who actually believe that the integration between digital and pharmacological can sometimes yield even better results. And they are not afraid of running a trial where the design is drug alone versus drug plus digital therapeutics. And if I can put less chemicals in the body of a patient by combining two things, why shouldn't I? And
Well,
I think
maybe
this
you
is-
can put more chemicals in. And I don't know that there are studies like this, but what about the co-administration of traditional and digital therapeutics to drive adherence?
If the digital component, Jen, in this regard, is only to provide adherence, incentivized strategies, gamification, a platform for engaging, then it's not treatment necessary, right?
Gotcha. Okay.
But I'm talking about really two
Yep.
therapeutic products, one in the form of a drug, one in the form of one of the companies that I really am, I think, doing an amazing job about it is Otsuka. In terms of Joe Powers is so open to this collaboration and is not afraid of combining those two together.
Well, now see, I just started down the whole, what do those curves look like? And show me the, anyway, I'm really interested in talking a little bit about DCTs and the digital therapeutic space too. So I'm going to advance the slide one, just so we kind of get started with a definition of DCTs. This is a draft. It is about to be published. So I'm actually giving credit to the DTRA work team that came up with this. But we hear the term DCT used in many, many different ways. I like this because it does talk about the desired outcome, which is really trying to reduce patient burden by finding ways to allow participants to participate in research without having to go to sites. And you might use technology, or you might use services, or you might use processes to do that. So it's a very broad definition by design, but I think there are ways to optimize DCTs. Now, whether or not, well, first, does this resonate with you, or is it still too broad to really be sensible to you?
Yeah, I think this makes sense, especially in a world where a lot of participants, that world being the digital therapeutics world, where a lot of participants are self-administering based off of a prescribed protocol or a clinical study protocol.
The definition is important in this case because a lot of people have been confusing the terms decentralized trials with remote trials, virtual trials, siteless trials, and decentralized does not necessarily imply that this is a fully remote.
Absolutely. And siteless is actually not a thing if you're doing it under an NDA. So how do you see?
And I would even say that siteless is not necessarily siteless.
Oh, well, hopefully you have some vision when you're doing your trial.
Right. Yeah.
How do you see the DCT and DTX environment and the Venn diagram between them, or do you see one? And I'll let you start, Amir, but I would like to hear from all three of you there.
Well, I will start by actually being rude and flip the question back to Everett and Todd, because I would say why digital therapeutics companies are so attracted to the DCT model. What does it have there that really fits with your need or addresses your needs more than traditional trial?
Yeah, I mean, just very quickly for Cognito, for example, we have a protocol where people are self-administering our therapeutic an hour every day for upwards of 9 to 12 months. We will, we do have site visits, specifically onboarding and kind of baselining at the outset, and then some site visits over the course of that treatment period. But if you think about it, we're alleviating an extraordinary burden by allowing for us to capture data that's associated with in-home use or self-administration over that period of time. Otherwise, we would have to have this person come in every single day. It's actually not feasible to self-administer, to have the product administered or the treatment administered. So what the decentralized nature of our study, I would say it's a hybrid, but the decentralized nature of our studies really allowed us to have a treatment period that's much longer than otherwise would be feasible. And there are parts of that allow us to collect data in a way that is, again, otherwise we would be collecting snapshots. So we'll have clinical trial participants wearing an actigraphy watch, and it's collecting thousands of data every day, day and night, actually. And that's feeding back into some of our endpoints for activities of daily living. And if we only did that at the clinical trial site, or patient reported outcomes, which we'll be doing that too. But if we only did it during those kind of slices and in snapshots, the data just would not be nearly as rich, and we wouldn't be able to stand ourselves up as a true platform that is digesting that level of data and being able to draw bright lines between administration of our therapeutic and those outcomes.
What I'm taking from you, Everett, is that there is some sort of an alignment between decentralized trials and digital therapeutics, because in both cases we are trying to make it easier on the patients, and we're looking for an intervention that patients can integrate very smoothly and easily into their daily life without traveling to a site, without going through painful or long procedures. So both models are based on the fact that this is something that I can just do on a daily basis at home, and therefore flexibility in the protocol is needed. It's like, I would say sarcastically, that in a decentralized trials, there are no protocol deviations. The deviations are expected in the first place.
I wish that were true, but they're not written that way yet.
It's not written that way, but if you write your protocol with, and actually, I started to write some protocols like that. I can give you one very simple example. Well, I did it because I was the PI and I didn't want to report the IRB every time there was a protocol violation or deviation, not necessarily violation. So it was a study where patients had to record their voice into a mobile app. And that was part of the both diagnostic measurement and the therapeutic. There was a therapeutic effect there too, because we trained them how to speak. But I couldn't expect, I didn't know how often it would be too much, even though we asked patients beforehand. So we didn't know if we asked them to do it every month, every 2 weeks, every week. And we were not even sure if we will capture changes in disease progression in such a short amount of time. But we said, let's do it every week. But in the protocol, we said patients will be using the mobile app up to 4 times a month.
I got it. So
Up
your
to 4
window
times a
was
month,
wide.
which means that if they only use it once, this is not a deviation. And I will handle it with data analytics, and I'll find a way to control for that. But at least it gave them the flexibility. They didn't necessarily know that they have been given the flexibility. But from a protocol perspective, it was not considered a deviation.
So maybe I'll ask a controversial question. Amir, you prompted it. If you have a virtually delivered therapeutic and you're using technology to do that, why do you need a DCT platform?
I mean, so, and I know Todd can answer this. My answer is pretty quick. It's that a lot of these companies are, and Cognito in particular is representative of this as well. We have clinical expertise, we have clinical trial expertise, but it's not our core. It's not the core competency that we're developing to be a, we're not developing a core competency that would allow us to be a CRO well into the future. What we are developing as a core competency is the ability to run clinical studies efficiently in complex health conditions and disease states. That's different than actually executing and standing up and building out all of the elements that a CRO or a platform like a Curebase, for example, can do and does, dozens, if not more times per year versus what we do in our company, which is 1 or 2 studies a year at most.
So it's providing that framework, the clinical trial conduct framework. Is that the oversight and the framed for data collection and oversight is what's helpful to you?
I think that's one factor. I think it's so like kind of clin ops, it would be another area where recruitment as well as flow through clinical trial sites, onboarding, data capture, data flow, even the biostats at the outset and over the course of the study, some help with design and development. All of those elements are factors in a clinical trial success. You have to have some of that expertise in-house, just like you do to drive anything forward. But at the same time, there's a difference between having a clinical development team and a clinical ops team and a medical affairs team that is pretty lean, like most of us are in this space, versus what it would take if you did all of that in-house. When you're talking, it's truly a different business. We're in the therapeutics business, not that is undergirded by research, not in the research business as our primary mechanism of driving revenue.
Todd, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, ditto. It comes down to bandwidth and cash flow. It's really that simple.
How about you, Amir?
I think the digital therapeutics companies at the beginning of the journey, they're doing small studies. They're not necessarily doing very heavy studies like you're doing now, where you have brain imaging and you have a lot of medical records at the site. Sometimes these are just first feasibility exploratory studies that are not involved the hospital at all. These are, you just ship the equipment or have the patient download the app, and 100% of the data is going through the cloud. There is no there's nothing like in a real clinical trial. which is why decentralized trials would fit the most, because decentralized trials allows you, the platform that Curebase and other companies in this space allow you to integrate data from multiple sources, from connected devices, even if you passively, continuously monitor the patients and get that data 24/7. There is no better platform for that. When the trial gets more complicated and you also involve the site and you also have medical records, yes, then you need a much more sophisticated platform. But at first, since all the data is electronic, decentralized trial platform would be serve you the best, and you don't need to overpay for CRO for services that you will never use.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
I have to run.
We all do, and I want to say thank you to all of you for helping set the stage. We may have a follow-up conversation later about how you continue to measure that effectiveness, how real-world data might play into the future of DTX, et cetera. But really appreciate your time and your wisdom. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane.
Thank you for having us.